Bigfoot vs. Werewolves. Written by B. Humphrey. Narrated by Kai Lanner. Chapter 1. When Shadows Crossed the Light. The fire crackled low, its embers glowing like dying stars scattered across the darkened earth. Smoke curled lazily upward, threading itself through the ancient pines that stretched endlessly into the night sky. The forest held its breath, as it often did when Koda sat by the flames. He didn't light fires often. He didn't need to. But tonight was different. Tonight, the forest whispered of a storm approaching, and it wasn't one made of wind or rain. Koda shifted slightly, his massive form casting long shadows against the surrounding trees. His eyes, dark as the deepest caves and glinting with the wisdom of countless years, watched the fire with an intensity that belied his stillness. Around him, the night pulsed with life. An owl hooted softly, its call answered by the distant rustle of leaves. Somewhere far off, a stream gurgled as it wound its way through the undergrowth, carrying whispers of the forest's secrets. He drew in a breath, the air heavy with the scent of pine, damp earth, and the faint metallic tang of something unnatural, something he had smelled before. It wasn't the first time he'd caught that scent in recent days, and it wouldn't be the last. But before he could confront what was coming, he needed to ground himself, to remember. Stories had a way of doing that, and he had plenty of them. The fire popped, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder, low and deliberate. Do you know what happens when a shadow crosses a clearing in the daylight? He paused, as if expecting an answer, though he was alone. The forest, however, seemed to lean closer, its countless unseen inhabitants hanging on his every word. They see you, he continued, his tone laced with something that might have been regret. Even when they don't understand what they're looking at. Even when they tell themselves it's nothing more than a trick of the light, or a story they'll laugh about later. They see. It was a long time ago, but I remember it like it happened yesterday. The first time anyone ever saw me and lived to tell about it. It was mid-autumn, he began, his voice a rich blend of nostalgia and weariness. The leaves had turned, the air crisp enough to carry the faintest sound for miles. I was heading north, following the calls of the geese overhead. I don't usually take the open trails, but that day, well, something told me to step out of the shadows. Maybe I was tired of being unseen. Maybe I wanted to feel the sun on my back. Or maybe, just maybe, the forest wanted me to be seen. The fire snapped as he spoke, punctuating the words. The clearing was wide, its edges framed by ancient trees that had watched over it for centuries. I stepped into the light, my shadow stretching long across the grass. That's when I smelled them. Men. His lips curled slightly, not in anger, but in a memory of surprise. 2 of them. They were standing on the far side, one holding a strange device, a camera, though I didn't know the word for it then. The other whispered, his voice trembling like the leaves around them. I could hear their hearts, fast and sharp, could smell their fear, like birds trapped in a cage. They didn't move, just stared. He let the moment hang, his gaze fixed on the fire as though he were still standing in that clearing. I could have vanished then, melted back into the trees before they had time to blink. But I didn't. Maybe I wanted them to see. Not all of me, just enough to remind them that this world still holds mysteries they can't explain. His massive hands rested on his knees. And so they did. They captured me, not with traps or weapons, but with that device, and they carried that image back to their kind, spreading stories and debates that would echo for years. They named me by my foot size. Men can be silly sometimes. But they didn't really see me. Not all of me. They saw what they needed to. A monster. A myth. A moment. Nothing more. He exhaled, the sound deep and steady. That day, I became more than just a whisper in the woods. I became a question. A legend. But legends are dangerous things. They make people curious, and curiosity, well, that brings trouble. The fire had burned lower now, its light casting flickering shadows across his solemn face. The forest seemed to stir uneasily, as if responding to the words. He tilted his head slightly, listening to a sound only he could hear. "They're here," he said softly, his voice as much a growl as a whisper. "Not the men with their cameras. Something worse." He stood, his towering form blotting out the firelight. The earth beneath his feet seemed to shift slightly, as though acknowledging his weight, his presence. He reached down and picked up a fallen branch, thick and gnarled, easily the size of a small tree. Tested its weight, then planted it firmly in the ground beside him, like a staff. "They don't belong here," he murmured, more to himself than the forest. "The wolves that walk on two legs, they bring death, not balance." He turned his gaze to the darkness beyond the firelight, where the trees stood silent and unmoving. "The forest warned me. The animals flee. The streams run faster, as though trying to escape. And the scent, that metallic tang, it's the mark of the unnatural." Koda began to walk, his steps silent despite his size. The fire behind him flickered and died, leaving only the faint glow of the moon to light his path. The forest seemed to part for him, its branches whispering in languages older than words. Koda moved through the forest as if he were a part of it, his massive frame weaving silently between the trees. Every step was deliberate, every breath in sync with the rhythm of the wild around him. The moonlight dappled his fur in silver streaks, making him seem even more ethereal. A creature of legend, but undeniably real. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, mingling with the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine. Koda's brow furrowed as his senses picked up the faintest traces of movement ahead. A broken branch, fur brushing back. "They're testing the boundaries," he muttered, "pushing to see what will break." His grip tightened on the branch he carried, now serving as a makeshift club. It wasn't the first time he'd confronted something that didn't belong, but this felt different. These weren't mere predators or invasive creatures. This was a force driven by hunger and malice, a corruption of the natural order. The forest opened up into another clearing, smaller this time, the ground littered with the remains of a recent kill. A deer, its body torn apart with a ferocity that spoke of more than hunger. The air was thick with the scent of blood. Koda knelt beside the carcass, studying it. The wounds were deep and ragged, the marks of claws that tore not for survival but for pleasure. His lips pressed into a grim line as he traced the marks with one massive finger. His eyes narrowed as he noted the unnatural spacing of the tracks around the body. Too large for a wolf, too wide for a bear. "Werewolves," he said aloud, the word carrying weight as though it had been pulled from the earth itself. Koda stood, the branch now resting on his shoulder like an axe. His gaze swept the clearing, catching the faintest glimmer of eyes reflecting the moonlight at the edge of the tree line. They were watching him, testing his resolve, A low growl rumbled from Koda's chest, more warning than challenge. The eyes vanished, melting back into the shadows. "You've taken your first step too far," Koda said quietly, his voice carrying a mixture of sorrow and resolve. "If you continue, your next step will be your last." Chapter 2. The Wolves That Walk Like Men. As I pressed deeper into the forest, the scent thickened. That metallic tang bit at the back of my throat, weaving through the clean breath of pine and loam. It crawled along the bark, clung to the leaves, settled into the soil. The forest was quiet, but not with peace. No, this silence was dense, pressed down like snow before an avalanche. I remembered the stories, voices of elders whose bones fed the roots of old trees. They spoke of cursed men, of spirits twisted by the moonlight. Skinwalkers, they were called in one tongue, moon beasts in another, each tale layered with fear, with awe, with warnings. "They were once protectors," an old Lakota elder once told me, his eyes pale with the weight of memory. "Men chosen to guard the sacred places, but power is a dangerous gift. They forgot what they were meant to protect, and became what they were sworn to destroy." I had seen it myself, the change, the rot that takes root in purpose left unguarded. Whatever these creatures were now, they were not protectors. They were remnants, predators twisted by something far older and colder than hunger. The glade I came upon had once been sacred to me, a place of stillness and healing. Now it stank of ruin. The trees here felt brittle in their silence, the air thick and heavy. The soil was torn, claw marks raked deep into the earth like something had tried to dig its way down and bury rage itself. "You don't belong," he said, crouching low and placing his palm to the dirt. The echo of the violence still lingered, humming faintly in the roots. "And I'll make sure you never do." A howl peeled through the dark, long and sharp, cutting the stillness like a blade. Creatures stirred, leaves rustled, wings beat the air in sudden flight. Even the stream behind me seemed to flinch, its rhythm broken. Another howl answered, closer. This one gurgled at the edges, not quite human, not quite beast. A sound caught between two worlds and comfortable in neither. He rose. Across the stream bed, the trees split, and from the shadows, a shape stepped into the light. It was massive, hunched, covered in patchy fur slick with old blood. It walked on two legs, its body twisted with muscle and ruin. The eyes glowed, not with animal instinct, but with thought, calculation, cruelty. Its lips curled back, revealing rows of jagged teeth, yellow and cracked and wet. Koda said nothing. He didn't flinch. He let the silence stretch, let the moment weigh on both of them. The werewolf snarled low and crouched, its claws dragging deep lines in the dirt. It bared its chest like a challenge, its posture half lupine, half mocking. "Come on, then," Koda said, voice low, steady. "Let's get this over with." It lunged. I swung the branch with the weight of a falling tree. It connected with a solid crack, sending the creature sprawling through the underbrush. Branches snapped beneath its body and the ground trembled from the impact. But it was fast, faster than anything that size should be. It rolled, snarling, and charged again with a howl that split the night. Claws tore through the air. I turned, letting its momentum pass me, and brought the club down on its back. Bone cracked beneath the blow. It screamed. No words, just hate. But it didn't stop. It twisted, slashing a claw across my arm. Blood ran hot down my forearm, but I didn't yield. I gripped the branch with both hands and drove it into the creature's side. It howled again and staggered back. I closed the distance. My hand closed around its throat. Thick fur slick beneath my grip. Its claws raked at my chest and shoulders, but I held on. Its breath was sour. Its gaze was wild. I could see the glint of something old and broken behind those glowing eyes. "Your kind doesn't know when to stop," I said, teeth bared. "But I know how to make you." With a single motion, I slammed it into the ground. The earth shook beneath the impact. The werewolf twitched once, then lay still. Blood pooled beneath it, steaming in the cold. I stood over the body, blood dripping from my wounds. The trees whispered again, uneasy. We weren't alone. The scent of the pack reached me before their eyes did. They were coming. They knew one of their own had fallen. I grabbed the creature by its arm and dragged it to the base of an ancient tree. Lifting its bulk with ease, I hung it from a low branch like a warning. "The pack will find you here," I said, voice like frost. "Let them see what happens when they desecrate sacred ground." The forest didn't breathe. It watched. I turned and vanished into the trees. The path bent through a dense thicket, the branches clawing at my arms. I welcomed the sting. Pain kept the senses sharp. I thought of the old stories again, thought of what these beasts once were. I stopped at a stream and knelt. My blood ran dark into the water before being pulled away by the current. For a moment, I let it go. Let the forest carry it. Let it speak for me. "Power is nothing without purpose," I said. "And they've forgotten theirs." Moonlight drifted through the trees as I moved deeper into the wild. Their footsteps weren't loud, but I could feel them. Weight against the roots. Breath held just beyond the boughs. A slow ripple in the land's rhythm. They were close now, hunting, closing in. But I wasn't prey. A clearing opened ahead. Uneven ground, broken branches, and jagged stone. The kind of place where old bones remember battles long past. I stepped into the center and began to work. A fallen log, heavy, thick, and wet with moss. I shouldered it and drove it into the earth like a post. Nearby boulders lay half-buried. I rolled them into place, reshaping the clearing into something else, a battleground. "I've faced worse than you," he said to the trees, to the silence beyond them, and they all learned the same thing. The forest protects its own. By the time the first light of dawn reached the treetops, the clearing was ready. They came like ghosts in the fog, tall shapes with glowing eyes and snarling breath. Their steps were slow, deliberate. They circled the clearing, searching, sniffing. The alpha was not among them. Not yet. I crouched behind the boulders, waited. One of them stepped forward, muscles twitching beneath its matted coat. It froze, sniffed. Its eyes met mine through the shadow. I moved first. The log cracked against its ribs with a sound like splintered ice. The werewolf flew backward into a tree, the impact folding it in half. Another lunged, and I turned, swinging what was left of the log into its jaw. Bone shattered. Teeth flew. I crushed the first beneath my heel and brought the club down again. Again. The ground grew wet. Two more burst from the edge. Their movements were sharper now, fear laced with instinct. They flanked, one to the side, one straight on, I grabbed the charging beast mid-leap and hurled it into the one circling left. They collapsed in a heap. Claws caught my back as I turned. I felt the sting, but didn't fall. I pulled the beast over my shoulder and drove it into a stone. Its spine gave first. The last of them hesitated. I stepped out from the shadows, blood soaking my arm, chest heaving. I didn't blink. "Go," I said. "Tell your alpha what happened here." It snarled but didn't charge. It stepped back. Then again. Then ran. I watched it disappear into the trees, its cries trailing off into the dark. The forest stood silent. The battle was over. For now. I moved through the clearing, stepping over broken limbs and crushed bone. The wind had shifted. Somewhere out there, the alpha stirred. I knelt by one of the bodies, not in mourning, but in understanding. These creatures weren't born like this. They were made. And I, being of the earth, am made of all things earth. Silver runs through my body and blood. These poor beasts are not unstoppable for me. "I didn't ask for this," I said, "but it's my burden to carry for now." I stood, letting the morning light catch the blood on my skin. The pack would come, in force, and I would be waiting. Chapter 3. The Grove That No Longer Grows. The forest was no longer the same. It wasn't the silence that struck me. Silence was a thing the forest wore often, like mist or frost. It was something else now, a kind of suspension, as if the air was listening, as if the roots themselves had ears pressed to the surface. I moved slow through the pines, breathing with the rhythm of the land, my footsteps sinking softly into moss so old it had forgotten the weight of men. The trees here were the kind that had names once, before even I walked among them. They grew in tight spirals now, as if drawn towards something deep in the earth. Not sunlight, something older. I hadn't seen a crow in 2 days. No rabbits either. The forest had begun to empty itself. It was here, I knew. Whatever had poisoned the pack, whatever had twisted the balance, whatever name it once had, it had been buried so deep in time even the stones forgot. But the werewolves spoke of it in hushed tones, like something that listened through the bark of trees and the silvered reflections of still water. Moonroth. A name spoken as a warning, a substitute for what was lost. The wind shifted, dragging with it the bitter reek of blood and iron. I stilled beside an ancient yew, its trunk hollowed by time, split open like a wounded lung. My fingers brushed the bark. It was cold, not the kind of cold that came with night, a sterile, lifeless chill. I crouched, tracing the dirt with one hand. Paw prints, deep, sharp, not just one set, a hunting formation. 3, no 4, moving together. Not chasing prey, patrolling. I stayed low and followed. The ground sloped downward, a forgotten deer trail winding between sunken stones and half-buried bones wrapped in moss. I passed an old druid marker, a circle of 7 stones surrounding a tree whose bark had been carved in ancient lines. The symbols were still there, but they bled now. Not with sap, with something black. The earth remembered the pact, and it mourned. I heard them before I saw them, the soft thud of padded feet, a snarl, a low whine. I edged behind a knotted birch and watched. 4 werewolves moved in a slow arc through a glade that had once been sacred. I remembered it when the grass grew blue in moonlight. Now it was ash. Their eyes glowed not with hunger, but purpose, Not rage, obedience. One of them paused and sniffed the air. My breath caught, but I didn't move. The thing turned its head slightly, then huffed and followed the others. They weren't hunting, not in the old ways. They were guarding something. I waited until they moved on. At the center of the glade, buried beneath a stone that bore no chisel marks, I found the remnants of a ward, burned bone, copper wiring, sigils etched in silver, half erased. Whoever had placed it there knew old magic. Whoever destroyed it knew older. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Not without protection. Far off, a wolf howled. The others joined in. But it wasn't the howl of the hunt. It was a prayer, the kind that isn't meant for the moon, but for what sits behind it. Moonroth. I moved back into the trees, silent as ash drifting through smoke. Whatever this was, whatever it had become, wasn't finished. It was building. And if I was to understand it, I would need to go deeper, past the edge of the maps, into places where the oldest trees grew in silence, where even the rot does not speak. Chapter 4. Root-Bound Secrets. The fog came down just past the hollow glade, curling low and heavy, dragging across the earth like a mourning veil. The trees grew older here, their bark blackened and slick with moss, their limbs contorted into the shapes of things that had never been trees. They leaned over the narrow path like watchers, arms twisted in agony, reaching for something they would never touch. I moved slow. The air reeked of rot and ritual. Not the natural kind, not the smell of deer carcass or fungal bloom. This was older, bitter, alchemical. The scent of something preserved and dead all at once, like a sarcophagus cracked open in moonlight. Somewhere behind me, a twig snapped. Too light for a werewolf, too delicate for the wind. A whisper dripped through the wind like a lullaby mixed with warning. I didn't look back. I didn't want to face what I knew was there in those dreadful forests. Something old, something deadly. I moved on. The deeper I went, the less the forest sounded like itself. Birds didn't cry here. Branches didn't sway. But I heard things that didn't fit. A whisper beneath the soil. A child's laugh, distant, warped and unnervingly cold. The sound of metal tapping against bone. I passed a tree with dozens of animal skulls nailed to it. Badger, crow, fox, deer. Each one had its jaw sewn shut with silver wire. I paused. There was intention here, not simple savagery. This was message and memory. The werewolves hadn't done this. I was being warned. An old druid shrine stood just ahead, half swallowed by earth. Its standing stones leaned in on each other like drunk sentries. Vines twisted over the runes carved into their faces, but the shapes still glowed faintly in the fog. Blood had been poured here recently. Not splattered. Poured. Ritual blood. The center of the shrine was cracked, as if something had burst out from beneath it. The roots trembled. I knelt and pressed my palm to the earth. It screamed. Not in sound, in vibration, in memory. The kind of scream that still echoes in your bones centuries later. Something was once bound here. And something else had broken it free. I traced the edge of the runes, my fingers coming away stained black. The silver veins beneath my skin began to glow faintly in response, not as a weapon, but a warning. Moonroth's influence was thick here, a layer draped over the land like mildew over forgotten stone. It fed on memory, on grief, on the bones of old gods. A noise. Not behind me. Below. I stood slowly. The soil shifted just ahead of the shrine. Not a tremor. A hand. Clawed. Gnarled. Rising slow from the ground. Not a fresh corpse. An old one. Embalmed in the breath of Moonroth. I backed away into the fog, watching as more shapes rose. Not werewolves. Not beasts. The warded dead. Whatever Moonroth had been, it was no longer just whispering to the living. I didn't run. The old ones don't follow the rules of pursuit. They were meant to be seen, to be counted. Their presence was a toll, a record. I had been marked. The trees whispered now. Low, guttural syllables not meant for the living. I made my way north, following the pull of a ley line I could feel beneath the roots. There were places in the forest older than maps, places built before the concept of path or prayer. I needed to reach one, not to fight, to remember. Chapter 5. The Deadvale Path. The forest shifted as I walked, though not in the ways one might expect. Trees didn't move, not exactly. They repositioned. The branches that had once formed an arch above my head were now tangled in a gesture more like warning than welcome. Roots crept closer to the surface. Stones I'd passed before now showed new runes that hadn't been there before. It was the forest's way of speaking. Slow, patient, unkind. I kept my pace measured. The earth here was wet with memory. Not water, not blood. Something heavier. It clung to my boots like guilt. Deadvale. That's what the druids called this place. A name scratched into only one surviving tome. Its pages rotted. Its ink made from ash and crushed bone. The Vale had no coordinates, no landmarks, no trail. But I'd found it, because I remembered the story. They said Deadvale was where the first mistake happened. Before there were werewolves. Before there were wards or bindings or silver teeth. There was a pact, and it was broken. The valley sank low into the land. A natural bowl carved by time and covered in hanging fog. Trees here grew in spirals, like they were coiled around something invisible. Some were split down the middle as if cleaved by lightning, though I smelled no burn. Only mold. Only decay. I passed the carcass of a stag. Its antlers snapped like twigs. Its body had not been torn apart. No, it had been opened, carefully. Reverently, the way a priest might open a sacred scroll. And inside, its organs were missing. In their place, roots. Pale, veined, wet things that pulsed faintly with borrowed life. The work of Moonroth's children, or perhaps the forest itself, trying to reclaim what was taken. I moved on. The further I went, the less light filtered down. The fog thickened. The air grew syrupy, as though heavy with something unsaid. Beneath it all, the ley line pulsed, a current beneath my feet, whispering in languages only the soil remembered. I came upon a series of standing stones half swallowed by the earth. Each bore carvings older than the runes I knew. Tall, thin figures with wolf heads and human limbs, their mouths open in hunger, their hands raised in supplication. Around their feet, smaller carvings of men, kneeling, offering bones, entrails, teeth. Worship. The wolves hadn't always been cursed. They had once asked for this. A grove lay beyond the stones, not sacred, blighted. The trees here bore no leaves. Their trunks bent inwards like broken ribs. In the center stood a stone slab, half shattered and covered in dried lichen. Bone fragments littered the ground, some human, some not, some still warm. The slab had been used recently, a ritual. The blood was still fresh. I examined it carefully. Symbols drawn in ash, spirals intersected by claws, the mark of a binding, but not to contain something, to summon it. I knew then that I was not merely walking through the aftermath of Moonroth's reach. I was walking into its awakening. The forest went quiet again, that oppressive, listening silence. I waited. I did not breathe. And I heard it. Not a howl, not a growl, but the crunch of leaves, the crack of bone. Something walked not far off, not in haste, not in stealth, deliberately. I moved into shadow, pressing my back against a rotten trunk. It gave slightly beneath my weight, soft with age, and exhaled a puff of mold and beetles. They came into view, 3 of them, tall, hunched, covered in furs and hides stitched together with sinew. Not werewolves in full form, shifters in between. Their eyes glowed dim yellow beneath the folds of their cloaks, and their feet were bare, cracked, their claws half extended. They muttered to each other in a dialect I recognized as older than man. I listened. He watches in the stone shadow, teeth in the root, rot in the mire, the balance undone. Call forth the fire. They passed without seeing me. I emerged only once the fog swallowed them whole again. They weren't scouting. They were pilgrims, and that meant there was a shrine ahead. I followed the faint smell of rot and incense. It led me deeper into a narrow cut in the land, where the roots of 2 massive trees had grown into one another, forming an arch. Beneath it, carved into the stone, was a stairwell. Old, deep, the kind of place where names are left behind. I descended. The stairs creaked though they were stone. Each step resonated with a different pitch, a different bone note, like a dirge for things not yet dead, but long forgotten. The air was colder here, not the cold of nature, but the cold of tombs, of deliberate burial. The shrine was not what I expected. It was small, humble, carved from black rock and shaped like a weeping face. Its eyes had been filled with wax that had long melted, running down its cheeks like old tears. Around it were bones arranged in spirals and small offerings, teeth, fingers, old trinkets, a single silver coin with a hole through the center. I recognized the design, the Druids of Velmar. They had worshipped Moonroth once, believing it to be the guardian of transformation. They offered their own blood in exchange for visions. But something had gone wrong. The visions became howls. The change became corruption. And now they were bones. I turned away from the altar. That's when I saw her. A woman, cloaked in ragged green, her skin pale and translucent, her eyes full of stars, not glowing, reflecting. She stood just at the edge of the shadows, watching. I did not speak. She did. You walk where the path was first broken, Forest Guardian. Her voice was wind through reeds, not hostile, not kind. He waits beneath the veil, beneath the root, beneath the skin. Moonroth. She raised a hand and pointed beyond the shrine. You will not find him in the fang, nor the claw. He is the sorrow in the seed, the hunger in the harvest. I blinked. She was gone. I remained there, in the shrine's gloom, long enough to hear the walls breathe, not with air, with memory. When I emerged, the forest had changed again. The path behind me had vanished. swallowed by fog and vine. The only way forward now was deeper, toward the place where the trees no longer grew, toward the place where Moonroth was not buried but born. And I would go there, not for vengeance, for truth. Chapter 6. Gallowsmire. The deeper I walked, the more the trees began to resemble gallows. Not in shape, though many leaned that way, but in memory. Their limbs stretched out crooked, broken at unnatural angles, and their bark split in long vertical gashes like no wound made by wind or time. They wept sap the color of rust. It wasn't just the trees. The very ground changed beneath my feet. What had once been leaf-strewn earth became bog-thick and blackened, soft as breath. Each step sank deeper than the last, and the air smelled of peat smoke and something cloying. Sweet. Rot sweet. I had come to Gallowsmire. It wasn't on any map, not even the old blood maps etched into bone by the druid sects who once tried to warn what would crawl back from the earth. But I knew the name. Every forest has one place that even the predators won't cross. This was it, and Moonroth's touch was thick here. Above me, the fog was different, not drifting, not moving, hanging. It clung to the limbs like draped cloth, thick and yellowed with age, unmoving even as I passed beneath it. The crows here didn't caw. They clicked, dry, rhythmic, like bones tapping together. To my right, I saw a noose made from roots. To my left, a wicker effigy, 8 feet tall, shaped like a man with the head of a wolf. Old and rotting, but something about it felt recent. The straw had been replaced, the ropes rebound. It was still in use. At the edge of the mire stood a structure I had not expected to find. A church, or what remained of one. Built from stone that had been dragged from a different part of the land. Wrong color, wrong grain. It didn't belong here, which meant whoever had built it wanted it to clash with the forest. It was a challenge, and it had failed. The roof had long since collapsed, and ivy choked the broken stained glass windows. But the bell tower stood, not straight, but proud, cracked and half covered in moss, but whole. I pushed the door open. The hinges didn't creak. They didn't move at all. The door fell inward with a soft, wet thud. Its hinges rotted clean through. Inside, the pews were overturned. The altar had been smeared with something dry and black. Not all paint, not all blood, but a mixture of both. A shrine had been built behind it, not to a god, to something else. A spire of knotted bone and rusted tools. Cleavers, branding irons, surgical hooks, woven together with thorns and horsehair. A face had been carved into the bone at the top. It looked almost human. Almost. Its jaw was elongated, and its eyes had no pupils. Beneath the face, scrawled into the stone and charcoal, the bargain was never broken. It was fulfilled. I knelt beside the altar. The symbols here were different than those in Deadvale, less precise, less sacred. They were carved by someone in pain, or madness. Repetition of the same 2 glyphs. One for mouth, the other for opening. The forest had long kept its secrets beneath bark and earth, but here, they'd spilled. Whoever had dwelled here had tried to unseal something, and had succeeded. In the center of the floor was a hole, rough-hewn, jagged, dug by hand. I lowered myself into it. The earth here pulsed with fungal light, bioluminescent strands threading the soil like veins. My fingers brushed along the wall as I descended. It was not all dirt. Bone jutted from the sides, and old wood timbers braced the ceiling above me. An old catacomb. The deeper I went, the more the air smelled of metal and dust. A dead forge, long since cooled, but its scent clung. And there, at the base of the tunnel, was a room. Stone, shaped into a circle. 12 niches carved into the walls, each containing a seated figure. Not statues. Corpses. Mummified. Preserved. Dressed in robes of midnight green and crimson. The fabric so ancient it had fused with their flesh. A council. One of the figures still held a book. The others cradled bones. I approached the figure with the book. The cover was dark leather. The pages edged in gold leaf, now flaking with age. When I touched it, the body crumbled to dust, leaving only the book behind. I opened it. The script was druidic, not common, not even known to most of the Forgotten Orders. This was first tongue, used only in the earliest rites, and it spoke not of worship, not of balance, but of binding. To still the voice of Moonroth, one must bind his name in flesh. 12 must offer blood, tooth, and memory. The earth must take their roots, and the wound must remain unhealed. The council had sealed him, not banished, not destroyed, bound, and I had stepped into his cradle. A sound above, soft, wet, like something sloughing off a wall. I closed the book and turned. A shadow moved across the narrow tunnel above, long, bent backwards at the limbs. I backed into the chamber, careful not to disturb the others. I drew a sigil on the floor with the ash of the mummified druid and whispered a phrase in the old tongue. Silver bloomed beneath my skin. The figure entered, a werewolf, but not fully formed. Taller, emaciated, fused with its cloak. Its bones jutted in wrong places. Its eyes were filled with black fire. It stopped at the edge of the sigil, sniffed, spoke. He remembers you. I didn't move. You carry root, or stone. The wound remembers the knife. It grinned, and I saw 3 rows of teeth. Then it turned and vanished. I waited an hour before I left the chamber. When I reached the surface again, the church was burning, quietly, as though it had simply decided it was tired of existing. The fog thickened, and the trees began to whisper my name. The hunt had begun. Chapter 7. The Hollow Root. The forest had changed again. It wasn't something you could see at first, not with the eyes. The trees still stood in twisted rows. The fog still hung like yellowed lace. But something deeper had turned, a shift in the marrow of things. The root system beneath my feet no longer whispered. It thrummed. I followed it. The trail was not marked, not carved or worn. It was suggested, the way a dream suggests a direction even when no door is visible. I knew I was meant to go this way, because every part of me began to resist. My limbs grew heavier. The ache in my bones sharpened to a metallic sting, like rust seeping into old wounds. The silver in me responded to the pull of something ancient and buried. The deeper minerals followed suit, quartz humming like a tuning fork, iron like a warning bell, and I knew I was getting close. The hollow root was not a place, it was a wound, a fissure in the forest floor where nothing had ever grown, and nothing ever would. The trees pulled away from it, their roots curling like fingers recoiling from a flame. No birds sang here, no insects buzzed, even the fog avoided it. But something lived beneath. I crouched at the edge. The ground split open like cracked lips, revealing a dark hollow choked with vine, bone, and the petrified remains of something once alive. Not a tunnel, not a cave. a burrow, though no natural thing had ever dug it. A smell rose from the hollow. Not rot, memory. I descended into the hollow root. The walls were veined with resinous amber, thick and glowing faintly, like captured light trying to remember the sun. Inside the amber, things moved, slowly. Shapes, eyes, teeth, but they made no sound. This was a place of preservation, a tomb that had failed. I stepped carefully, the floor slick with a strange secretion that clung to my feet like warm sap. The tunnel twisted downward in impossible angles, Escher paths carved by something that did not walk as we do. I saw symbols carved into the wall, one after the next, repeating, spiraling inward. Mouth, seed, fang, mother, moon, each one drawn with bone dust and blood, old blood, black now. This was not just a den, it was a nursery. I heard them before I saw them, soft mewling, not childlike, animal, wounded, hungry. I stepped into the chamber. Eggs, dozens of them. No, sacks, pale and veined, webbed with root and hair. Inside each, a shape barely moved. They twitched, turned, scratched faintly against the membrane. And then I saw what watched over them. She stood at the far end of the chamber, taller than me, cloaked in a shroud of woven moss and antlers. Her skin was bark. Her eyes were hollow sockets filled with flickering spores. Her hands cradled one of the sacks like a midwife, the mother of the hollow. She spoke without lips. "You came too late." I didn't answer. "He is not buried here. He is becoming." I stepped forward. She didn't move, but the sacks began to tremble. One burst open with a wet snap, spilling a half-formed shape onto the stone. Furred, jawless, blind. It writhed. It sang. A low warble that vibrated the bones in my chest. I reached for the stone dagger at my side. The mother's voice cut into me. "If you kill one, the rest will mourn, and their grief will poison the soil." I paused. There were too many, and she was right. The hollow root wasn't where Moonroth slept. It was where he was multiplying. I backed out, not in fear, in understanding. Sometimes the sword is not the answer. Sometimes the only way to kill a forest fire is to cut a line around it and let it burn itself out, alone. I needed to find the Druids' last living heir. If anyone still carried the ritual that could bind what had slipped its leash, it would be them. But I had to move quickly, because the mother had begun to hum, and all around me, the sacks began to shudder in unison. Their hearts had started to beat, and they were learning the shape of their hunger. I climbed out into the night, my body slick with ash and moss, my eyes burning. The trees whispered no longer. They chanted, and the stars had begun to vanish, one by one. Chapter 8. Black Fen Dirge. The black silt came up to my ankles within minutes. The fen stank of iron and memory. Each step sank deeper than the last, threatening to hold me there, not just physically, but spiritually. Like it remembered the blood that had once soaked into its soil and wanted me to join it. This was the Black Fen, where the earth had never stopped weeping. The trees here were fewer, but taller, looming like forgotten titans with their arms dipped in tar. Their bark was black, slick with something between sap and rot, and their roots twisted above ground like veins clawing for air. The fog clung lower here, tight to the earth as if trying to hide whatever crouched beneath it. The wind didn't move. The birds didn't sing. Only the breath of the fen, slow, wet, and ancient. I moved carefully. My body still bore the ache of the hollow root. The silver and stone in me had begun to shift again, reacting not to the scent of werewolves, but the pull of something else, something sour, unclean. And I wasn't alone. I heard them before I saw them. Low growls, shallow breaths, claws scraping against bark just out of sight. A pack, smaller than most, sloppier, impatient, but not weak. The first broke through the reeds to my right. Young, lean, covered in brackish mud. It leapt before it roared, which was its first mistake. I caught it mid-air, my hand snapping around its upper and lower jaw. Its eyes widened. It tried to bite down, but I was already moving. I ripped. The skull split with a wet crack, the jaws tearing apart in opposite directions. The scream never finished. I dropped the halves to the mud. The second came fast. I sidestepped, grabbed it by the leg, and with one clean spin, slammed it into a tree. The trunk split, and the creature's back broke with a sound like splintering firewood. It crumpled into the muck, twitching once. 3 more emerged, hunched, growling, smarter. They circled, tested, waiting for me to turn. I didn't. A blur moved behind them. A 6th, no, 7th. There were more than I had thought. I lowered into a crouch, drew silver to the surface of my skin. My bones hummed. "Come, then," I whispered. They charged. It was chaos. Claws slashed across my side. I caught the arm and crushed it at the elbow. Another snapped at my shoulder. I headbutted it so hard its eye socket imploded. One leapt onto my back. I grabbed its leg and yanked it over me, its spine snapping as it struck the earth. Blood sprayed. Mine, theirs. The fen drank it all without judgment. And then I saw one, at the edge of the trees, past the fight. A lone werewolf. He didn't move, didn't snarl, just stood, half-shadowed, watching. His fur was mottled, patchy. His ribs showed beneath the skin. His eyes weren't wild. They were hollow, empty, lost. Not hunger, not rage, abandonment. The others charged. He didn't. We locked eyes for just a moment, and I saw what had been left behind in him. A boy, a brother, something that never wanted the curse but wore it because no one offered him anything else. I took one step toward him. He turned and vanished into the trees. The last of the pack died screaming. When it was over, I stood in the silence, my chest rising and falling. My body ached, my limbs burned, but my mind lingered on the one that ran. I didn't chase. There's no honor in slaughtering the lost, only the wicked. I crouched at the edge of the fen and washed my hands in the black water. It didn't clean, but it cooled the sting. Werewolf scratches do more than hurt. The pack was dead, but the forest whispered still. Moonroth's reach had grown, and the lost were beginning to outnumber the damned. I moved on, the reeds parting before me like breath, and the fog closed behind me like a secret. Chapter 9. Hollow Hearth. The trees began to thin. That was the first sign. The second was the smoke. Lazy, curling ribbons that trailed up through the canopy, blending with the gray mist like ghosts first learning to rise. I followed the scent. Peat fire, boiled potatoes, iron tools worked by old hands. Human things. Civilized things. The forest gave way to a wide clearing rimmed by leaning fence posts and half-rotted totems. Crows watched from the wooden arms, their heads cocked in eerie silence. The village stood beyond them, if it could still be called that. A clutch of stone huts, a single crooked bell tower, and a dried-up well blackened by mildew. Hollow hearth. I did not enter at once. Humans fear the forest. They fear what walks inside it even more. And I am what they see when they dream of teeth in the dark. Children were the first to see me. They didn't scream. They froze. One dropped her bucket. The clang rang across the clearing like a warning bell. Doors slammed. Curtains twitched. Tools were abandoned mid-use. When I stepped across the threshold of the village boundary, they stared from the shadows, eyes wide, hands trembling. One man raised a pitchfork. Another whispered prayers in an old tongue. I said nothing. Let them see. Let them feel the weight of what walks among them. Because fear keeps people alive longer than curiosity ever has. An elder stepped forward. Bent with age, but not weakness. His beard braided with rosemary and lavender sprigs. His cloak stitched with patterns I hadn't seen in over a century. He walked with purpose, his cane thumping once with each step. The others parted for him like sheep sensing a herding dog. He looked up into my eyes and nodded with wise eyes and a disarming smile. "You're late, Stoneblood." The name made the others murmur. He turned to them, raising his hand. "Peace. He walks with the deep grove. He walks for us, not against." One voice called out, skeptical, "What is he?" The elder answered without looking away from me. "What we pray finds us before the wolves do." They let me into their gathering hall. Low ceiling, smoke-stained beams, herbs hanging from the rafters like wind chimes of the dead. They didn't sit near me. Only the elder remained close, his sharp eyes reading the lines of exhaustion and blood on my skin. "I've seen their tracks," he said. "Closer every night. One of ours vanished 2 moons ago. Then another. No blood, no struggle, just gone." "Taken," I said. "Aye." I laid the black moss and scorched bark from the hollow root before him. He didn't flinch. He touched it, fingertips lighting on the ash like a priest blessing bones. "The corruption is deepening." "Moonroth's name has returned," I said. The fire popped in the hearth. The elder closed his eyes, whispered something in the old language. I heard one of the villagers outside cross themselves. "Then we are near the ending," he said. "Not yet," I told him. "Not while something still breathes that can remember the binding." He looked at me, long and careful, and then he smiled. "Then you must go to the Whisper Cairn, south of here, where the bog sings without wind, where the last of the old blood sleeps. She may still carry the chant." "I need one thing before I go," I said. He nodded. "Supplies, shelter, and a story you haven't heard yet." I didn't correct him. The villagers never quite lost their fear. But by the time the moon rose that night, someone left a bundle of dried meat and flint by the edge of my cot, and a child, perhaps the same girl who dropped the bucket, left a woven doll of twigs beside my fire. Its eyes were pine seeds. It wore a cloak of moss. It looked like me. I said nothing, but when I left before dawn, I carried it with me, and the forest welcomed me back without a sound. Chapter 10. Root Steep and Remembrance. The path to the Whisper Cairn carved through the southern hills like a scar left by something older than roads. The trees here bent inward, not from wind or weather, but time. So much of it they had begun to remember the shape of the sky wrong. Moss carpeted every trunk, and the earth breathed beneath my steps. I followed no marked trail, but the land guided me, and the scent of something familiar. Old bark, sweet root, wet pipe smoke. He was still alive. I found him in a hollow between 3 ancient oaks, seated atop a twisted stool carved from a single black knot of ironwood. He hadn't moved since I last saw him. Maybe 200 winters past. Maybe more. His beard now brushed his knees, tangled with lichen. His eyes, pale and nearly clouded, flicked up before I said a word. "Koda," he rasped, like the wind through old reeds. "About time." "Time is slippery," I said, crouching beside his fire. "You of all things should know." He chuckled, a sound like shifting bark. They called him Root Steep. Once, long ago, he was human. Maybe. Now he was something between tree and man, memory and moss. His skin was barked over in places, his fingers gnarled like roots, but his voice held the weight of the first stories. He handed me a steaming cup carved from antler. The tea inside was dark and thick, made of ground root and rain caught in stone hollows. "Drink," he said. "It remembers better than either of us." I drank. It tasted of earth, of bone, of the places between thunder and silence. For a while we said nothing. The fire crackled. Somewhere, a whippoorwill sang its lonesome call. The trees leaned in, eager to listen. "You feel it," Root Steep finally said. I nodded. "It stirs." "Moonroth." He spat the name into the fire. It hissed. A name left in ash trying to claw its way back into bark and blood. "The cairn might hold answers." "It will hold danger," he corrected. "But you knew that." I looked at him then. Not the bark, not the beard, but the eyes. Still human in their way. Still carrying the sorrow of man. "I remember the wars," I said. "So do I," Root Steep whispered. "Not in story. In blood. In burning. When the skies went red and the rivers whispered in screams." He closed his eyes. "Do you remember the shale giants? The ash elk that fed the last spirit fires? The cloud walkers, who came only in mist?" I nodded. "And the Denisovans." He opened his eyes again, soft now, kind. "They were gentle things, stronger than us, but never cruel. They knew the stones, could sing the weight from mountains." "They didn't survive," I said. "They changed," Root Steep murmured. "The last of their kind faded into the hills. Some say their spirits still walk when the wind is right. I've seen the shapes sometimes, when the sun's behind the mist, tall, quiet, watching." "They would weep if they saw this world now." "They do," he said. "The stones weep for them." He poured us another cup. We sat in silence, sipping the root brew while the forest hummed the music of old wounds and older songs. After a long time, Root Steep spoke again. "Whatever comes, you are not alone. Not truly. Not ever. The forest remembers, and there are still old things that haven't forgotten why you were made." I stood. He didn't. He wouldn't. He had rooted here for a reason. Some guardians watch by walking. Others watch by staying. "I won't return for a long time," I said. "I'll still be here," he said, "or close enough to listen." I clasped his shoulder. He reached up, and for a moment, his hand was strong again. Then I turned. The wind shifted. The path to the whisper cairn waited, and the forest behind me whispered blessings in the old tongue. Chapter 11. The Whisper Cairn. The hills rolled like the backs of sleeping titans, their shoulders cloaked in fog and old sorrow. As I moved among them, the wind whispered fragments of a language older than men, threading through twisted pines and crag-rooted stones like a song half forgotten. They say the cairn only appears when it's ready to be seen, that its stones shift with the moonlight, and the path turns to mislead any who walk it with fear in their hearts. I wasn't afraid, but I was wary. The earth changed as I neared the place. Moss grew black. Streams ran still and thick, like veins beneath skin. The trees stood farther apart here, as if refusing to crowd too near the bones of something they could not forgive. And the singing began. Not music, but tone. Low, deep, and steady. Felt more in the ribs than the ears. It came from beneath the ground, a thrum like breath, like mourning. The cairn was waking. It stood in a hollow choked with stone and root, a barrow of shale and bone, crowned with standing stones wrapped in old glyphs and iron rings. At its center, a door, carved from a single slab of petrified wood, veins of silver running through it like blood in stone. I laid my hand on the door. It was warm, not from sunlight, from memory. I whispered the name Rootsteep had given me in secret, the name used by the old blood, before language broke into dialects and borders. The door groaned open. Inside, the air was thick with the weight of age. Dust hung unmoving. The walls of the passage were carved with reliefs. Faces, claws, moons in every phase. Wolves with eyes like stars, and men with faces like time. A crypt of stories, a vault of forgotten truths. I moved slowly, each step echoing like a drumbeat. My fingers traced the markings, a battle here, a pact there, a face I knew and had tried to forget, torn by regret and crowned in flame. The chamber opened ahead, a circular vault lined with obsidian and bone. At its center, a single sarcophagus of rootstone, sealed by threads of silver and bound in wolfskin. And standing beside it, a woman. She did not move. Her skin was pale, hair coiled like ivy, her robes woven from bark and shadow, eyes closed, breathing shallow, alive, but barely. I stepped forward. The room did not resist me. As I neared, her eyes opened. Not human, not wolf. Something in between. "You've come," she said. Her voice was wind on water. "At last." "I seek the name," I said. "The true one, before it was Moonroth." Her lips pressed together. "It is not a name meant to be spoken, not aloud, not without sacrifice." "I have given blood." "You must give memory." She stepped back, placed her hand on the sarcophagus, whispered something that made the stone hum. Images spilled from the walls, glimpses of an age before man, of creatures that walked in thought and breath, who bound the wolves of night with songs sung in root and flame, of a pact broken when greed clawed its way into the flesh of men. "Say the name," she said. I did. It was not a word. It was a sound, like the closing of a tomb, like the first breath after drowning. And everything changed. The cairn shook. The glyphs lit. Far beyond the hills, the werewolves howled. Not in triumph, not in rage, but in recognition. The name had returned. The old one. The one they had fled. She smiled. "You carry it now. The binding tongue. And the wolves, I asked. They will come, as they always do, drawn to the name like iron to thunder. I looked at her. Then we'll speak again, when the last moon is high. She nodded and sank back into her trance, back into sleep, back into the dream she had waited lifetimes to break. I turned and left the cairn, the song of the earth rising in pitch behind me. The war had not only begun, it had remembered. Chapter 12. The Blooded Moon. The cairn closed behind me without a sound. No slam, no groan, just a stillness so absolute it swallowed birdsong, wind, and breath alike. I didn't look back. The name lingered in my mind like a buried ember. Not a word, not truly. A vibration that hummed in my bones, resonating with every silver vein and earthen mineral in my body. I felt heavier with it, as though the land had whispered its oldest secret and I had agreed, unknowingly, to carry its weight. The forest did not welcome me as it once had. The trees were older here, gnarled and shivering in winds that did not touch the ground. Thornbrush grew thick along the pathless hills, forcing me through choking corridors of bark and bone. Small creatures watched from burrows, their eyes like mirrors, and the moon, full now and red, hung low, watching. A blooded moon, the first in 100 years. The werewolves would stir, but it wasn't them I feared. It was the earth. It was remembering more than just names. By midnight, I had reached the edge of the black hollow fens. Not a true swamp, but a bogland riddled with slick silt and treacherous pools of dead water. It was a place where things drowned and didn't stay buried. I'd avoided it for decades. Even beasts avoided it. But tonight, the whisper led here. The fog thickened as I stepped into the lowlands. It coiled around my legs like wet silk. Each step sent ripples through the black pools beside me. Rot and iron perfumed the air. That was when I heard them. The soft, wet slap of feet not far behind. I didn't turn. They weren't trying to sneak. They were trying to herd. I moved faster, stepping over a fallen log crusted with mushrooms that glowed faintly green. A crow croaked once in the distance, then silence. And then they came. 3 werewolves burst from the fens ahead, tall, matted, fanged. Their eyes glowed not gold but dull red, feral, tainted by something beyond bloodlust. I saw the way they trembled. Not rage, hunger. They lunged together. I met the first with a roar and caught it mid-air, gripping its skull with one thumb in each socket. My bones thrummed with the old name's power. I tore. The skull split like greenwood. The body dropped in 2 halves, steaming in the cold. The second struck my side, claws raking flesh. I turned with the blow, seized its arm and swung it like a hammer into the nearest tree. The crack of bone echoed across the fen. It dropped, limp. The third paused at the edge of the fog. I looked at it. It looked back. Not hungry, not snarling, just watching. Its eyes were not red, not gold, just sad, empty. We stood there for a breath, then 2. I stepped aside. It bolted, vanished into the mist without a sound. I said nothing. There are monsters, and there are those who simply don't want to be. Dawn threatened the horizon as I emerged from the fens, soaked and bloodied. The name still pulsed inside me, stronger now, drawing more than just wolves. drawing things from beneath the dirt. I needed to rest, but first, I needed answers, and I knew exactly who could give them. The hollow librarian, keeper of maps no one remembered, curator of songs no one dared hum. He dwelled in the roots of the old abbey ruins east of the scorch pines. I hadn't seen him in 2 centuries, but the name would call to him, just like it had to me. The road ahead curved black beneath the rising sun, and beneath it, things waited, remembering, stirring, waking. Chapter 13. The Hollow Librarian. The scorch pines rose like blackened fingers clawing at a bleak sky, their bark blistered and cracked from fires long past. Nothing lived here now, not bird nor beast. Even the insects kept to the borders. I moved through the silence like smoke, my feet stirring ash that had not shifted in years. The abbey ruins lay beyond the northern ridge, where the land bowed inward like a scar. The stone was half buried in ivy and soot, moss reclaiming the forgotten altar and bell tower. Yet below it, far beneath the broken nave, was a deeper place, a vault carved into the roots of the world. That's where he waited. The hollow librarian. He was not a man, though once he had been. Nor was he a spirit, though his body had long stopped aging. He was something in between, a keeper of forgotten things, bound by oath and magic to remain beneath the abbey until the old truths were needed again. I descended the crumbling stair hidden behind the altar, its stones worn smooth by centuries of weather and ash. The air grew colder with each step, the smell of mold and candle wax replacing smoke. At the base of the stairs, a narrow tunnel opened, lined with shelves carved into the very rock. Books, scrolls, bones. The light came from no flame, just a faint blue shimmer that seemed to hover in the air like breath on glass. And then, his voice. "The earth speaks again, and you wear its name." I stepped into the main chamber, where the ceiling arched into a dome of fossil-lined stone. The hollow librarian stood in the center, his robe stitched from cobwebs and parchment, his face hidden behind a mask of old birch bark, eyes glowing faintly beneath. "It was whispered to me," I said. "In the cairn. It woke something." He tilted his head. "Not something. Everything. That name is not just history. It's memory. And memory is power." I moved closer, the air charged with static. "Tell me about Moonroth, what it was, what it became." He walked slowly to a shelf and drew out a long scroll wrapped in leather. Unrolling it on the stone table, he revealed a map not of land, but of time. Spirals and branching lines drawn in blood and ink. "Before it was Moonroth," he began, "it was nameless, a hunger bound in form. The first cursed wolf was not a beast, but a being, sent to watch over the changing tides of the world. But it devoured what it was meant to guide." I stared at the map. "And the curse spread." "Yes. Through dreams first, through moonlight, through pact and broken promise. It is not just blood that binds the werewolves. It is story. Moonroth is the great forgetting, the silence that followed the scream." He looked at me. "You have not forgotten. That is why it comes for you." I leaned over the table. "How do I stop it?" He unrolled the map further, revealing a glyph burned into the bottom corner. A circle divided by a silver line, flanked by 2 thorns. "You don't. You remember. You speak the name. You awaken the others." "What others?" He stepped back. The old ones, the keepers, those like you who have watched, who still carry the earth in their bones. You must find them, and soon." I turned to go. "Koda," his voice stopped me. "There is a price to memory. It will not just reveal truth. It will take something from you." I nodded. "Then let it come." I left the library in silence, the air heavier now, the path ahead twisting into something darker. The wind had picked up, and with it came howls. Not from the werewolves, but from the ones who had remembered me, my kind, the ones still left. Chapter 14. The Bonewood Circle. The sky bled slowly towards twilight, and with it came a deep, bone-heavy cold that clung to the ground and whispered through the trees. I crossed the threshold into the northern glen where the scorch pines thinned and the moss gave way to marble-colored earth. The trail here was not made of dirt, nor root, but of stone. Pale, vein-laced stone etched with sigils I hadn't seen in 1,000 years. They'd risen since the moon turned red. The hollow librarian's scroll hadn't marked Bonewood with any certainty. He'd only spoken of it in riddles. Where the elk lords fell and the silence took root. I followed the wind and the old rhythm beneath my skin. The earth speaks when you stop trying to hear it. And that's when I found the circle. Trees frozen in agony, twisted and bleached white like the bones of gods, their bark etched with long-forgotten runes, now pulsing faintly in the dying light. No leaves, no nests, no life at all, only silence and stone. The Bonewood Circle. I stepped between the first two trunks, and the temperature dropped 5 degrees in an instant. Breath fogged the air. Even the insects vanished. And then I heard the hum. Not a song, not quite, but something akin to a resonance, a vibration moving beneath the earth. It tickled the silver in my blood, and it called out to something deeper than instinct. The center of the circle was marked by a cairn of shattered weapons, spears and axes, swords too rusted to remember war. Atop it sat a slab of ironstone, pocked with the scars of fire. Carved deep into its face was the old glyph, the same one the librarian showed me. 2 thorns, a circle, a line of silver between. I crouched beside the stone and laid a hand upon it. It vibrated faintly, like something breathing deep below. The bones of the elk lords? Their spirits? Or something else entirely? The answer came in the form of wind. Cold, sharp wind that sliced through the petrified grove and carried with it a scent I hadn't known since the old wars. Ash and fir. The werewolves arrived without sound. 6 of them, emerging from the tree line with a dreadful grace. Their forms were leaner now, taller, more twisted. Their limbs longer than they should be. Their eyes, fierce. But they didn't attack. They circled. One of them dropped to its knees before the stone and let out a low, guttural wail. Less beast than broken thing. Another began to claw the earth. They were performing something, mimicking a rite, a memory of ritual passed down through teeth and blood. I should have stopped them, but I didn't, because something inside me stirred in response. The stone flared beneath my hand, and for a moment I saw, not with eyes, with memory. Not mine, not fully. Flashes of the elk lord standing tall, tusked and crowned in moss. A circle of fire, a pact forged in silver blood. The first curse, the betrayal. Then a scream. And then it all faded, swallowed by wind. The werewolves stopped, stared at me. One stepped forward, its breath fogging in the cold. Its eyes were golden, but dull. Not rabid, not hateful. Curious. It opened its mouth, tried to speak. What came out was not a word, just a choking, raw rasp. That was when the others broke from the trance. A scream. The circle erupted. One lunged. I sidestepped and slammed my elbow into its spine. Another clawed at my ribs, but I grabbed its snout and hurled it into the cairn. Bone cracked. Blood spattered across the stone. The third tackled me head on. It was smaller than the others, but frenzied. Its claws raked my chest. I roared, lifted it by the throat, and slammed it into the frozen earth. Twice. It didn't rise. I spun to find the golden-eyed one again. It stood just outside the circle now, watching. Its chest rose and fell like it remembered how to breathe. It didn't run. It bowed and vanished into the trees. I stood alone in the bonewood circle, panting in the dark. The stone no longer pulsed. The grove no longer sang. But beneath the earth, something had stirred, and it remembered me. I lit no fire that night. I sat at the edge of the circle, drinking melted frost from a stone basin and watching the shadows writhe between the trees. They weren't wolves. Not anymore. Moonroth had touched them, bent them. Not just body, memory. I looked to the stars. Time was unraveling. The werewolves were becoming less like beasts and more like a message trying to take shape. Something older than language, older than form. And I was its last reader. The next piece of the map lay east, toward the buried vale, once a cradle of cryptid alliances, now long collapsed. If the keepers ever lived, one of them would have gone there. Perhaps one still remained. I rose before dawn. The forest didn't sing. It watched. And beneath the stone of bonewood, something dreamt in a language I hadn't heard in centuries. But it would soon. And I needed to be ready. Epilogue: The Ashes and the Ember. The fire crackled low, fed by ancient wood that smelled of cedar and ghost pine. Its warmth was soft, not blazing, just enough to push back the cool fingers of the night. Smoke curled up in slow spirals, rising to meet a sky hung heavy with stars, each one blinking like the eye of something long asleep but not yet gone. Koda sat cross-legged before the flame, his massive frame hunched slightly in thought, his thick fur catching the gold of the embers like woven shadow light. Around him, the forest stretched endlessly, silent but alive. The breath of the trees a steady rhythm in the distance. Somewhere, an owl hooted once. A breeze stirred the ferns. The night was not empty. He inhaled slowly. The air tasted of ash and pine sap, earth and rain. The ghosts of memory still clung faintly to the wind. Echoes of Dunmire, of the Vale, of the altar split like an old wound finally forced open. He let them come. Let them whisper. Because they were quieter now. Balance had teeth, and they had been bared. "The forest remembers," he murmured, "but it also forgives." His voice was deep, weathered, patient. It did not stir the trees. They listened, as they always had, without needing to speak. He reached into the fire, pulling free a half-burned stick and running his fingers over the char. He drew lazy lines in the dirt, symbols older than language, older than even him. They weren't for protection or power. They were just memory. "I've seen the bones of gods," he whispered, more to the wind than to himself. felt them shift beneath my feet, heard them weep in their sleep. A leaf drifted down beside the fire, curling as it hit the heat. The flames reached toward it briefly, then let it go. Koda's eyes followed it. We forget how many souls lie beneath our roots. We forget the weight of old promises. His eyes closed. The fire hissed. But I don't. I can't. The memories of Moonroth shimmered behind his eyelids, not in terror, but as a long shadow cast by something once bright. Not evil, just broken, fed too long on sorrow and thirst. I am not the first guardian. I won't be the last. But while I draw breath, I will be this one. I will walk the ridgelines. I will mark the stones. I will hold the line between what belongs and what should never have been. His claws tapped gently on the blackened wood. Sparks danced upward into the dark. I don't need thanks. I don't need legends. I need only the silence after a storm. The hush that means life continues. That something still breathes. A fox cried in the distance. High, brief, then gone. Koda smiled faintly. Even the smallest voice matters. The fire was almost out now, down to red bones and faint whispers. He stirred it once more, then leaned back against a stone. Above, the stars had shifted. He did not sleep. Guardians rarely do. But his eyes softened, and the forest curled closer around him, waiting, watching, balanced, for now. This has been Bigfoot vs. Werewolves, written by B. Humphrey, narrated by Kai Lanner. Copyright 2024-2025 by B. Humphrey. Production copyright by B. Humphrey.